All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our third webinar in regards to allergens. So today we have two guest speakers with us. I'd like to welcome Karen Purcell and Gavin Buckett. Gavin is the director of Gourmet Guardian and Australian Food Safety, food auditor, and involved in producing the first All About Allergens CD-ROMs with AIMS and Anaphylactics Australia. Karen Purcell is the Policy and Programs Officer at the Food Safety Unit of New South Wales Food Authority, and everybody knows Ingrid at this point. So I'd like to say welcome to everyone today and thank you for joining us. And I'll hand straight over to Ingrid.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so, and thanks to Gavin and Karen for agreeing to help me out on this one. I think it's always nice to have the experts in the room, and these guys are the sort of, auditor and regulatory experts. So here we go. So we're going to talk about navigating the regulations around allergen management in food service. And as we know, this is always a shared responsibility of food providers, authorised officers, auditors and legislators. Okay, sorry, just progressing slides. Right. So again, just reiterating that our key points for allergy, that there's no cure, and so complete avoidance is the only way that people with food allergy can manage their condition. Reactions happen to really small amounts, so a drop or a crumb of food can cause a reaction. And reactions can be life-threatening. So as food service providers, we need to know what is in our food and prevent cross-contamination. But where do we stand legally with this? Okay. Right. So I'm going to hand this one over to Karen, who's going to talk about where our regulations start with managing food in food service and food allergens. Karen
Thanks, Ingrid.
Purcell.
Thanks, Ingrid. Thank you. It's probably the best place to start is we're looking at from a national perspective. So if we look at the Food Standards Code, and hopefully you're all very familiar that we have that as a national requirement. There are 4 chapters within the Food Standards Code. So the ones mainly that we're going to talk about today are Chapter 1 and Chapter 3. So within Chapter 1, we've got Standard 1.2.1, which is requirements to have labels or otherwise provide information. So within that standard, it tells us the businesses that are required and what type of products need labels and what are the requirements on the labels. So that is
reckless driving, damage to property, leaving the scene of a crash with serious injury.
I think
could I just ask that everybody goes on mute, please? Thank you.
Great, thank you. So basically, the requirements and what needs to be on those particular labels. So when you have a look at a label on a packaged product, and it's got all of the things like the nutritional panel, it's got allergens on there, it's got, country of origin, storage conditions, etc. That's where you find out in the Food Standards Code what those requirements are. So also within Chapter 1, we have Standard 1.2.3, and within that standard, it's basically about information requirements, warning statements, advisory statements, and declarations. So that's another really important one that we need to have a look at. And within that standard, it references Schedule 9. So within Schedule 9, it tells us how the allergens must be declared, what format, etc. So it gives us that requirement within that Schedule 9. Also, if we have a think about health claims overall, there is also another schedule within the Food Standards Code, Schedule 4. So really, as we get into what type of claims, etc., that a food business might have, there are quite a lot of requirements around it because you need to be able to substantiate what you're saying. So, but leading back into allergens, they're the main areas within the Food Standards Code, and they apply on a national basis. Over to you, Ingrid.
Okay. So just a reminder for everyone about which allergens have to be declared. So it's all of the tree nuts individually, peanut, egg, milk from animal foods, milk from mammals, sesame, soy, mollusk, fish, crustacea, lupin, and wheat. And barley, oats and rye are now mandatory declarations to help out people with celiac disease, along with wheat. And then we have sulfites as well, which can also cause serious reactions. So that's just a reminder of the allergens that we're talking about that are governed by the Food Standards Code. And then I'll get Karen to just talk a bit more about the food safety side, the food safety chapter.
Great. So we've introduced chapter 1, and so now let's have a look at chapter 3. So with chapter 3, we've got the food safety standards. So there are probably 3 main standards within that chapter that we need to really have a good look at as retail food businesses, which is 3.2.2, which is food safety practices and general requirements. That's been around for a long time, and a lot of our processes that we do in food businesses align with that. And also 3.2.3, which is food premises and equipment. One that's recently come into effect as of December last year is 3.2.2a, and that's been a national requirement across the board. And that's why you would see around the country now that food safety supervisors are required in those applicable businesses. So that's something new that's come into effect. So food safety supervisors are required. There's food handler training that's required under that standard. And there's specific training that must be completed. For example, safe handling of food, food contamination, cleaning and sanitizing, and personal hygiene. So as you can see, it is also related to allergens underlying because of those requirements there. So that food handler training can be done, through a course that you go and do, or it can be done through a demonstration to an environmental health officer. The last one is showing food is safe. So that's really evidence of record keeping, etc., to make sure that you can show if an EHO or environmental health officer or auditor goes in that your food is safe. So with that 3.2.2a, it's really working out where does your business sit? Does it sit as category 1, where you do, potentially hazardous food that's ready to eat, that's been unpackaged and processed and cooked, etc.? Or are you a category 2 business which has minimal processing but is still potentially hazardous and ready to eat? So there's lots of tools, and Ingrid's going to go through those with you later to find out, where that business sits. But 3.2.2a has come into effect nationally, and underlying to that is that allergen management requirement as well.
Thanks, Karen.
That's okay. I thought I might just mention as well that the code is enforced by state and territory governments, and keep in mind that each state and territory have food acts and regulations, as well as the National Food Standards Code.
Yeah, great. And I've popped the links and some QR codes later into the Food Standards Code websites and whatnot, where you can get all of that information. But there is, so the Food Standards Code is one, regulation, and as Karen said, we've got states and territories laws and regulations, food acts that govern that. But there's another law that also applies to food that's sold in Australia, which Gavin is going to talk about now. But I'll just mention as well that New South Wales is the only state that has comprehensive mandatory allergen training for food safety supervisors, which Gavin will know all about as well because he's an RTO. But this allergen training we hope will be filtering down to the other food handlers in that food business in terms of being encouraged to do further training in allergen management. And all of the states and territories have been sent the package that we've put together with the New South Wales Food Authority to help implement or encourage RTOs in other states to train similar allergen content in their food safety supervisor courses. So over to you, Gavin, to talk about the other laws that govern food in Australia.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Ingrid, and welcome to everyone that's on the call. As Karen's alluded to, and in the previous webinars, there are certain allergens that must be declared under the Food Standards Code. But when we're looking at providing food to people that's fit for purpose, we also need to comply with the with Australian consumer law. So under the ACCC and Australian consumer law, you must be able to provide food that is true and correct. We've got to make sure that it's not false or misleading. It can't be deceptive, and that applies to food products as well. So under Australian consumer law, they have a reference to a group of claims called premium claims, and if a business indicates that the product that they're providing is free of a certain ingredient, the examples on the screen include gluten, dairy and nuts. If you say that a product is gluten-free, dairy-free or nut-free, that's a premium claim that your business is choosing to make. It's not compulsory to make free of claims, but if you choose to make a free of claim, you need to make sure that the product is 100% free of that ingredient 100% of the time. So under consumer law, you need to make sure that the product is free of those ingredients. Because it's a premium claim, you're not allowed to say things like may contain gluten, gluten-free, and then have an asterisk next to it to say may contain gluten. I'm using gluten because it's probably the most common claim I see, but if you're saying that something is nut-free or dairy-free, you can't then put an asterisk saying traces may remain or cross-contamination may be present. So if your business is choosing to make that claim, you need to make sure 100% of the time that that ingredient is not present. In the Food Standards Code as well, there are some businesses that use the term low gluten. That is a measurable amount in the Food Standards Code as well. So if you're looking at using that low gluten claim, make sure that you're aware of exactly what the measurement amount is. It does permit very small amounts of gluten, but it can't exceed a measurable level. Can we go on to the next slide, please?
Yep.
So with those free of claims, as I said, if you're making a claim that something is free of, you need to ensure that that product is 100% free. What I see in with chefs in kitchens is that often their tongs or their knives or their tea towels, chopping boards, etc., are being used for multiple different food products. And if a food business is saying that something is gluten-free, then there can't be any airborne gluten. There can't be any breadcrumbs on a pair of tongs. It can't be the same knife that's been used to cut a pizza or to cut a sandwich. You can't be using the same board to cut a gluten-free sandwich on as you used for a different food product. So if you're making that claim, you need to be 100% sure that you deliver on that claim. Personally, the kitchens that I go into, it would be very, very difficult for most kitchens to deliver on that claim. Unless that ingredient is completely void of that kitchen and the products that you're buying are completely void of that ingredient, it would be almost impossible to make a gluten-free or a dairy-free or a nut-free claim in most restaurants. On top of that, in Victoria, manufacturers that are making allergen-free claims, they are now required to have an independent food safety program, and those food safety programs need to be independently audited. So if you've got a group of restaurants and you've got a central production kitchen that is supplying into those restaurants, then that requirement will apply to those businesses as well. there's comments there on the bottom of the screen around requesting guests to make their allergies known to you. The last thing we want is guests assuming that they know what's in the food. So just give them a prompt to say, look, if you've got a dietary request, please let us know.
And it's also, I think it's also good, would you agree, Gavin, that, you know, on your menu, it's good to make your menu items really descriptive so that it's really obvious what allergens are in the meal, like a feta and walnut salad or something like that, you know, so it's really clear what's in there.
100%. If it's an egg noodle or it's a Waldorf with walnuts, if you've put shrimp in your jambalaya or whatever it is, we don't want a menu looking like an ingredient list, but any of those allergens that are present, I think by listing them in the menu, it alerts people with an allergy to the menu items that they can't have, but it also alerts them to the range of allergens that you've got in your menu, and in your kitchen as well. If you're going to say that something is gluten-free or dairy-free, also make sure that the supplier of those ingredients are making the same claim. I see it time and time again where someone will put on their breakfast that the sausages are gluten-free or dairy-free, and then you go and look at the ingredients and the manufacturer doesn't make the same claim. So I struggle to see how a restaurant can say that it's going to be free of those ingredients when the manufacturer is not prepared to make that claim. Sometimes I see people have a separate deep fryer where they're cooking the chips for the gluten-free, but then you go and look at the packet in the freezer and the chips they may contain gluten or something similar. So if you're going to make that claim, you need to make sure that you deliver on it 100% of the time.
Yeah. And again, I think, you know, just reiterating that better practice is probably to have, you know, your wait staff ask about allergies and have a note on the menu or on the counter to ask people to declare their allergies so you can have that conversation about whether you can prepare a meal on the menu that is suitable for them, that doesn't include their allergens, rather than saying that something is free of.
I think it's also good to keep in mind about substitutions that need to happen as well with menu items. You know, made a claim, and you know that is something that we are dealing with in the food market at the moment. So that would be something to consider as well. How easy is it to substitute one item for another if need be?
So the allergen content might change. Is that what you mean, Karen? You might not. The supply of the standard ingredients might be interrupted, and so then an allergen enters that meal, which may not have been part of the recipe before.
Exactly. Especially when time is of the essence of getting meals out, and yeah, that could be something that could impact.
Yeah. So keeping the menus up to date with that information is difficult. So, with regard to the laws, what does this mean for food businesses? So basically, the customer has to tell you that they have a food allergy. So you're not really liable until then. Once they do tell you that they have a food allergy, or if they ask about whether an allergen is in the food, then you have to give them accurate information, which means in order to comply with that, we need to know what ingredients are in the meals that we prepare and serve. And you can give that information either verbally or you can show them written information, so some sort of documentation about the allergen content of the food. And then if the food is on display, then you can have the allergen information displayed with it. So you might have, you know, a tart or a pie that says contains wheat, egg and nuts or something like that. So again, I think you're better off saying what allergens are in the food. And then or have that food information available when customers ask for it. And then telling customers how you manage the risk of cross-contamination is part of that information, because as Gavin said, you know, we've got those cross-contamination risks and customers just want that information about what you're doing in your kitchen or in your displays to minimise that risk of cross-contamination so that they can then make an informed choice about whether they want to eat there.
So Ingrid, we've got a question from Amanda that's online, which is, my understanding is that by law, a food business must comply with customer allergen requirements. But what about if the customer has a food intolerance or just doesn't like the food? I'll throw that open to the floor.
I think Gavin or Karen can answer this as the regulators and auditors.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. My understanding is that by law, a food business must comply with customer allergen requirements. But what about if a customer has a food intolerance or just doesn't like a food?
Try doesn't take it.
So when a customer tells a food business about their dietary needs, a food business doesn't have to provide a meal for that customer. So if they feel that they can't provide a meal or they think that the risk is high, they need to communicate that to the customer. Now, whether that's an intolerance or an allergy or a dislike, the food business must provide that accurate information to the customer. But the food business doesn't have to produce a meal for that person if they don't feel that they are, if they don't feel they've got the appropriate equipment or the appropriate facilities to produce it. When Ingrid said before around customers have to tell you that they have the food allergen, that is 100% correct. The only exception to that would be if the food business had already told the customer that the food was going to be gluten-free or dairy-free or nut-free or halal or garlic-free or vegan or whatever the dietary requests are that people are asking for. If you've told them that it's going to be one of those, then the customer doesn't have to tell you that that's how they need it, because you've promised them already that that's how it's going to be. But providing accurate information to customers is no different whether it's a allergen, an intolerance, a dietary request, a preference, etc.
Great. Thank you very much for that.
There is a little bit more about this in the next couple of slides as well.
Great. Thank you.
So moving on with what it means for food businesses. So you can't describe food falsely or mislead customers when they tell you they have a food allergy. So giving customers the wrong information when they ask about food allergens is a serious offence, and this is where we tend to get most of the fines or imprisonment, mostly fines. And it includes serving a food that's different to the food. So if a customer requests a food without an allergen and you agree to provide it and it contains the allergen, that's considered a false description of food under the various food acts. And also if it's different to something that was claimed on your menu, as Gavin said, if you've claimed that something's dairy-free and it turns out it's not dairy-free, then that is a false description of food as well. And we generally only, you would see that these things come to court when it results in harm. So when someone actually has a serious allergic reaction or an allergic reaction, I think you would get, probably, people get served the wrong food probably pretty often, or, something that's slightly different to what they asked for very often in food service. But when it comes to someone who's told you that they have an allergen and they receive something different that's going to harm them, that's where the legal responsibility kicks in. So some examples of what would be considered under the law as being a false description of food. So this is where they would apply the law to these situations. So, for example, if someone tells a waiter that they have a wheat allergy and the waiter kind of dismisses them or doesn't believe them and tells them a menu item does not contain wheat, even though they know that that has wheat. So you can't really dismiss allergies, as I'm sure none of you do, but that has been known to happen in the past. Or if a customer tells you they have an allergy to egg, and you say, yep, the burger doesn't contain any egg, and we won't give you egg on the burger, But then if you don't quite check the ingredients of all of the burger items, and if you serve them the burger and it had egg in the meat patty and they react, you would be found at fault for that, and it would be considered a false description of food. And then another example is if someone says that they've got an allergy to capsicum. Remember that not all allergies are part of those, those common ones that cause 90% of reactions. But if a customer tells you they have an allergy to any food, and you go through the conversation and you agree to provide them with a meal with no capsicum, and it comes out with capsicum, that is also a false description of food. So there's the food acts around the country are all slightly different, but there are model food provisions that are an agreement between the different states, whereby these are the sort of the offences that are under each Food Act in terms of what is a false description of food and where you can create an offence in terms of food service. So if a food is provided to a consumer and they're likely to suffer physical harm because of the information provided by a business, so that's a serious offence. So if you tell them the wrong information about the allergens that are in the food, that's considered a serious offence. Other offences which are sort of considered less serious is failure to comply with a purchaser's request for a particular food, if they don't comply with the Food Standards Code. For example, when you just don't provide any allergen information at all to a customer when they ask for it. And when a food, so like that capsicum example, when a food is requested to be prepared without a specific ingredient and it contains that ingredient. Karen or Gavin, do you want to add anything to that?
The one bit I was going to add is that Ingrid, you touched on the businesses that may be prosecuted under the state-based food acts.
Yeah.
As a secondary concern for a business owner is that the individuals that get served the meal can take civil action against the business as well. So if the person ends up in hospital or the person dies, the family of that person can take legal action on top of what the regulator or the health departments are taking as well.
I was just going to add, in this case, we're just sort of showing 4 examples of where the allergen requirement, could sit. So these are one of many that are within Food Acts and model food provisions, but these are the 4 most likely that would, if there was a problem with an allergen within a business, that's where it would sit in one of these.
Yeah. Okay, and so then, some businesses feel like they have to provide a guarantee, but this doesn't really protect anyone. Consumers don't expect to eat out with zero risk. So consumers with food allergy eat every day. They eat packaged food every day. Packaged food don't slap a guarantee on there. They just try and give accurate information where they can. And that's really what consumers, when we've asked consumers what they want when they eat out, obviously they want to be able to eat out safely. There's no one that expects zero risk when they eat anything. They should always have their medication on them when they eat out, and they should use it appropriately. And that is another arm of education that Allergy and Anaphylaxis Australia are providing to their consumers. But what they do expect is to be given accurate information from the food business about what is in the food that they, have had that conversation about might be appropriate for them on the menu, what steps the food business takes to prevent cross-contamination, and that you'll actually do that. And also that they'll get given the right meal, so the one that they actually ordered and the one that's been provided, that's been prepared with care, with the allergens in mind. And so then once you've agreed to provide a meal, if you think you can provide that safely, and we know there's lots of ways that, you can provide meals safely. Once you've agreed to provide that meal, do take the steps to minimise the cross-contact risk. And that's obviously one of those conversations that you'll have. And so this is all part of knowing what's in your food, being 100% truthful and preparing food safely. So that's all the scary stuff. So what we really don't want is to for businesses to be so worried about allergen management that they turn more people away. So people who live with food allergy, one of the biggest impacts on their quality of life turned away. They get shunned when they declare their food allergy, or they're just sometimes not treated very well by the food business. And also, as I said in the first webinar, do you really want to be turning, 2 every 50 away from your door? Do you want to be turning 10% of your families away who have, infants and children with food allergy? My answer is I don't think so, because I think they're really good business. And if you have a good food safety culture that includes food allergen, it can be really good for your business in terms of people coming back and spreading the word amongst the allergy community that yours is a place where they can eat with confidence. And so I guess and Karen and Gavin, jump in anywhere you want here, but I'll just quickly run through, the main facets of compliance, which we've talked about in the other 2 webinars. So we kind of got into the nitty-gritty detail, what to do in the kitchen with cross-contamination. But I really think it does start at the top with that food safety culture, having some procedures in place, know what the procedure is around food allergy, which includes that communication aspect of asking customers to tell you about their food allergy, and your staff being well trained, having a food safety supervisor who can actually get your documents together so that your staff have access to information like standard recipes and menu matrices, so that you can double check what is in those items on your menu when someone asks about food allergens in a particular food item. Having the signage on the menus, access to information. So if a product isn't labelled, then you need to request those product information forms or the specification forms or spec sheets or data sheets or whatever it is you call them in your food business, which have the same information as what's on a food label in terms of whether an allergen is in that food or not. Obviously, the preparation techniques, which we talked about in the last webinar, to prevent all of those cross-contamination of allergens in the kitchen. And then your internal audit, so you can use our audit tool for that, or you can get an external auditor to come in and audit your business with an allergy lens, which can then add on to your general food safety program to do those extra steps for food allergen management. And having a good relationship with your authorised officer, I think, is really important as well, because they are there to help you comply with the law. So they're not always the big stick. You can approach them and say, hey, we need some help here. Can you can you help us out with some allergen management with resources and tools and, just your legal obligations and how you might be able to improve things. And then always checking as well. So I've got the chef there checking the label, because even with all of those, bits of information, so your menu matrix and your standard recipes and all of your product information forms, that's going to give you that allergen matrix, you still have to check on the day when you're making that particular meal for someone with a food allergy, that information on those labels is correct and that you've got the right product in your hand that's going to give you the accurate, kind of allergen content for that meal. And I'll just quickly whiz through the last few slides and we'll open up for questions. But I guess, and Gavin, you can jump in here because you were talking about this the other day, but I've put up an example of a standard recipe. So a standard recipe is where you list all of your your ingredients for a particular recipe with all of your brands, and then you can go through and figure out what the allergens in those items are, so that when your chef or your wait staff or whoever's making that meal is checking whether those allergens are in that product or are in that meal for someone with food allergy, they can go, oh yes, it is in there. Either we can't make a replacement, or I could make a version that doesn't have those particular ingredients in there that might be safe for that person. So there's templates and samples of these that you can use. We've got them on our website. I'm sure they're available in other places as well. But you can also have like a little summary list at the end of it. And that can then be used to populate your menu matrix, which is sort of all of your menu items that staff can quickly look at to see whether a menu item might be suitable for somebody who comes in and declares that they have, you know, a nut allergy or an egg allergy. They can actually look and see which items might be available, and then the chef can double check using the standard recipe. So what if something goes wrong? So I think firstly, help the customer. It's really important that, you know, we get them the right help. Keep the food, so freeze the food and label it, because that food might be required for testing. You know, it really does help enhance that sort of learning for everyone. And you might have done due diligence and everything, and it might not have, you know, if someone does have an allergic reaction to a food, when you're confident that the ingredient wasn't in their food and that the cross-contamination was handled well, if that food is tested and found not to have the allergen, then that actually supports your case that you're doing everything correctly. And sometimes it might be that you've actually used a food where the manufacturer hasn't declared the allergen in it. And so that, you know, you might still have done everything, but it might actually be further back along the chain before the food even got to you that was contaminated and you didn't have any knowledge about it. Report the incident to the local authority. That is a legal responsibility if someone has, you know, come to any harm in your restaurant. And, you know, conduct an internal investigation. So use it as a learning and improvement opportunity, and support your staff. It can be a bit, you know, it can be a bit traumatic for some staff if someone has had an allergic reaction. You know, deaths from anaphylaxis are rare, but they can be traumatic, obviously. So in terms of resources to support, so FSANZ have their food allergen portal, lots of information on there. It's all freely available, and it goes through the different industries, so food manufacturers and food industry. And then the Food Standards Code is also available, obviously, through their website because they write it. So you can look at the various sections there. And then your food regulatory agencies are also listed on FSANZ. So depending on what state you come from, you can contact your local authority, and they're there really to help and support. Obviously, they do audit and they do enforce the legislation, but they're also there to help you, and most of them will have a helpline for food businesses to contact when they're having any problems or just not sure about something. This is an example just with the New South Wales Food Authority. They have lots of information there about food allergen labelling and how to handle food allergens in food service. And then there's various you know, RTOs and food safety businesses that do train in food allergen management and will help you with your processes. And then a good start for your general food handlers as well is the All About Allergens training, which Gavin helped design in the first place. So, you know, there's a bit of scary stuff there, but as I said, we don't want to turn you off. So I think now is a good time to open it up for discussion. And fire away with your questions and the tools and things that can help you do food allergen management well.
We've got a very quiet group today. There's hardly any questions in the chat. If you want to ask a question, oh, here's one. Sorry, there's one coming in. Given the critical role of EpiPens in managing severe allergic reactions and recognizing anaphylactics, should restaurants be required to keep EpiPens on hand? And if so, what guidelines should govern their storage, maintenance, and use? Karen, you're smiling. Is that one for you?
I think that's more related to Ingrid's speciality, but it's an interesting question because
Yes.
we do get asked that question as a risk management tool, and but yeah, there's a few requirements around that. So I think I'll pass over to Ingrid for that one.
So I think for general food service, I don't think it needs to be legislated that there's a requirement, because people who are eating out already know that they have a food allergy, and so they should have their emergency medication on them, and they should have enough of it, and it should be used at the appropriate time. For other food service situations, so for example, childcare, have to have a general auto-injector, adrenaline auto-injector on site for children that might need additional or that might react to a food for the first time, and other vulnerable populations, that's where you would want that as part of your first aid kit. Some workplaces like mine sites would want to have one in their adrenaline, in their kit. And then if you've got someone in your restaurant or, one of your workforce who does have an allergy, you might want to think about having one then. But your general population should be carrying their own EpiPen, and we don't want people going out and eating out and relying on every single restaurant to have an adrenaline auto-injector that's in date. So my short answer is no, but in some situations where you've got a vulnerable population that you're serving, children, camps, that sort of thing, I think that does need to be in there, and some of that is legislated in some states.
Would you also have to have your staff trained to use an EpiPen if you have one on site?
If you have one on site, then it would be a good idea to have them trained. There you can do, it's probably a good idea to have one or two people trained in first aid on site anyway. For using an EpiPen specifically, there is anaphylaxis training, sort of webinar training on the ASCIA website. So that's free to do as well, and you get a certificate at the end of it. So you can teach your staff in a very short period of time how to recognise anaphylaxis and how to use the adrenaline auto-injectors.
Ingrid,
Sorry.
Ingrid, I believe that there's a shortage of EpiPens at the moment as well. Is that resolved?
It will be resolved shortly. Yeah. I think the other thing that was important that I don't think we have actually reiterated in this particular webinar is that, and Karen and Gavin, you could probably talk to this better, but most of the, I think actually all of the deaths that have occurred in food service have occurred because the person has been given that ingredient in their food, not through cross-contamination. So cross-contamination is important and we do worry about it, but the most important thing is that you know what the ingredients are of your food and you don't serve that allergen as an ingredient to someone who is allergic to that food.
Yeah, agree with you, Ingrid. That's probably you see a lot of the recalls that come through. It could be from, allergen labelling that, is not correct on those. And I think we in food service do use those packaged foods a lot and, unpackage them. So, I think you're right in that regard. I think I'll probably add as well, in cafes and restaurants, which I'm assuming the majority of people on the call are from, you're not going to have labels on those particular foods. So you do go back to those packaged foods to make sure that they're correct. But you do need to be able to provide that information to your customers either in a verbal way or a written form, and it needs to be accurate at the end of the day. So, yeah, I think that I'd just add that piece as well.
And just to add to that, it was touched on one of the earlier slides that had all of the different boxes on it. So there was one slide there that talked about training. Training the front of house is as important as training the people that are making the food, because if the kitchen don't get the right information, they can't prepare the right food. Then the right food needs to get to the right customer. So making sure that the front of house are trained is paramount as well.
And let's say someone did go down in your restaurant, would you get, and you didn't have an EpiPen, etc., you knew it was an allergic reaction, would you put them in the recovery position? Would you stand them up and walk them around? Practically, how would you deal with somebody in that situation? I'm just, for me, it's put them in a recovery position, but I'm just making sure I'm right.
Yeah, so you put them in the recovery position and you call an ambulance immediately. And if you need to start CPR, start CPR. And yell out, has anyone got an EpiPen or an Anapen? Because you can give someone else's auto-injector. You won't do any harm doing that, and you are protected by the Good Samaritan Act, giving someone an EpiPen. So don't be worried about giving an EpiPen or an Anapen. I have to say both. And sometimes people will be carrying them, so you can certainly use them. Yeah.
It's an interesting one because a friend of mine, she was coming back from overseas recently and has never ever in her life had a reaction and had one on the flight. They didn't have an EpiPen, but like that, someone in the crowd had one and were able to administer an EpiPen, which stopped it on the spot. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Thanks, Karen. And I think also to sum up is that, there's lots of tools and lots of help to help food businesses do food allergy management well, and with a bit of planning. So, utilise your food safety supervisor to do the planning around your processes for food allergy and keep your food allergy information up to date, because they're a really important resource who now have, additional training in food safety. They can help train your other staff and, get your standard recipes happening and your menu matrix and keep them up to date, but they need time to keep it up to date. And I think this is something that you mentioned, Gavin, wasn't it, about that planning and having enough time to do that.
Correct.
Yeah. So that you can focus on what you're doing.
Exactly right. And it was alluded to that we are a training organisation, but often people make training decisions based purely on cost. I can get it for this price or I can get it for that price, but we are talking about people's lives and deaths, lives here. So make sure that the training provider that you're using is going to give you the best information that you need.
Wonderful. Oh, we've got a very quiet group today online. I can't see any more questions coming in. So firstly, I'd like to say I really appreciate Karen and Gavin and Ingrid your time today. This is such a valuable topic, and I'm sure everyone will get lots out of this. As we know, these are being recorded and will be up on the ACF website very soon, along with webinar 1 and 2. Our next webinar is on the 25th of September. And it'll be Future Trends in Allergen Management, Innovations and Insights. So you get to see, I think, myself and Ingrid again. I don't know who else will be joining us at this point, but I hope everybody has a lovely afternoon, and thank you all again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.